that I've been working on. And so today, I guess what I'll do is introduce some parts of it. And it can be quite busy. So therefore, I already know not, go but so far. So I'm going to start out by reading in the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verse 13, as you find it. And so today, we're going to talk about numbers. We're going to talk about numbers. This is something that is always on my heart and just there. So I'm going to kind of just take us through some things and I guess, again, introduce some very basic numbers to us. So I'm going to use the board, and since I'm not going to use the technology today, but I'm going to use the board so that they are there and we can kind of see a little bit of a track where I kind of go and end up. All right, so Bereshit chapter 15. I think I need to back it up to verse 10, verse 9. Matter of fact, let me just start at verse 1. That way I want to give a good picture of where we are so that you can kind of see some things that we have in that are repeating themselves. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 15, verse 1. These are the events, the words of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision, saying, Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward is exceedingly great. And Abram said, Master, Yahweh, what would you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus? And Abram said, See, you have given me no seed, and see, one born in my house is my heir. And see, the word of Yahweh came to him, saying, This is not your heir, but he who comes from your own body is your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look now toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, So are your seed. Very interesting, right there. He has no children, but he speaks of his children compared to the stars of heaven. That's if you can count them. Now, today, we can probably count them, but that tells us there's something different about what he sees and what we see. We're kind of limited in our night visions or our even our day visions. But our clouds have kind of taken over the skies that somewhat every day almost it's either cloudy or very densely cloudy. And for most of you know that I've been studying this for a while, and I used to think, am I kind of just seeing things, or is this something that's really going on? And I'm going back to early 2000s, 2001, 2, 3, back during that time. And so as I kept studying and I began to count the days of cloudy days out of a month. First I started with the week, how many cloudy days are a week? And I began to see the shift of more cloudy days than sunny days. Then I said, let me try a month, 30 days. And when the number of cloudy days surpassed the number of sunny days, I'm like, okay, there is something definitely here. And I began to inquire on the net and, do my little search. And it wasn't a lot of information, but today's kind of cutting short. There's a lot of information out there, and they even have a name for it now. It's called chemtrails. Chemtrails, which is short for chemical trails. Chemical trails. But if you would like to look it up at some point, look it up, and it is just simply chemtrails put together. And I guarantee you'll get a lot of information. Now they're even doing conferences, annual conferences, where countries and scientists and political folks are coming together to try to figure out what can we do to remedy what is going on. Well, they have an agenda that has been put together. For most people, this may be something that it doesn't interest you. But for me, I have an interest because I'm seeing signs in the heavens. Not only from our Father Yahweh, but also from the enemy who said, I will climb to the heights of heaven, and I will place my throne above yours. And so what basically he is saying, I will copy what you do, and I will cause people to worship me instead of you. And so just looking at this, we can see that our skies have been cloudy, and there is just strange events that are taking place. Is it to hide certain events so that we don't see them when they are to take place? Prophecy that we are looking for? Maybe it is to prevent us from bearing witness to truth. It remains to be seen, but I think the truth of it will come out at some point. So the question that Abraham asked is, Master Yahweh, what would you give me seeing I go childless, verse 2, and the heir of my house is Elazar? And so Yahweh answers and tells him, come on outside. Look at the stars. If you are able to count them, so is your seed. So, thank you. Now, I want you to keep that in mind right there. Continuing on, verse 6, and he said, believe in Yahweh, and he believed in Yahweh. So we know the conversation is Abraham and Yahweh. He believed in Yahweh, and he reckoned it to him for righteousness. And he said to him, I am Yahweh, who brought you out of Ur-Kasdim, to give you this land to inherit it. And he said, Master Yahweh, whereby do I know that I possess it? And he said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, and a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. So here's 5 different sacrificial animals. And he took all these to place, and he took all these to him and cut them in the middle, and placed each half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. And the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, and Abraham drove them away. And it came to be, when the sun was going down, and a deep sleep fell upon Abram, that see, a frightening great darkness fell upon him. And he said to Abram, know for certain that your seed are to be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. That is one of our numbers we're going to hold on to. Verse 13. But the nation whom they serve, I am going to judge, and afterward let them come out with great possession. Now, as for you, you're going to your fathers in peace, and you are to be buried at a good old age. Then, in the 4th generation, they shall return here, for the crookedness of the Amorites is not yet complete. And it came to be, when the sun was going down, and it was dark, that see, a smoking oven and a burning torch passed between those pieces. On the same day, Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, which is Abraham, saying, I have given this land to your seed, from the river of Mizraim, Egypt, to the great river, the river Euphrates. And we'll start looking at some things from there. So what do we have? We have 400 years of a wait time. Now, so if there's a 400 year of a wait time, let's go ahead and start with that. 400 years. All right, so here's 400 years. And this is a particular space of time. Now, our job is to interpret what Yahweh has already spoken, if we don't understand it. Because he speaks this in plain language. Hebrew, of course, but plain language. So let's look and see what we have here. But he says in the 4th generation, his children would return to this place. So let's look at the generations. We have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons. That's our 4th generation. So Yahweh says they will return here for the crookedness of, who is that, the Amorites? Let me go back and make sure. Yes, the Amorites, verse 16, is not yet complete. So, let's look at this, just this part. So, your descendants will be enslaved for 400 years. Now, let's look at what is factual. There is 500 years between Abraham, the birth of Abraham, we call him Father Abraham, there's 500 years between Father Abraham and the birth of Abraham and the birth of Israel. right away, let's solve this with 10 jubilees. Every jubilee is 50 years, right? And so we have a 400-year enslavement. So right now, it looks like 400 years fit inside of this. Kind of good. Only if we think through it, they haven't been born yet. There's a 500 years between them. So Abraham is born, then the children of Israel come out of Egypt. Now is where it gets a little sketchy, because now we got to think about how many years were they in Egypt. So let's go to Acts. No, I want to go to Galatians. We'll look at Acts as well. Well, since I called that one first, I'll go ahead and do that one first, and then we'll go to Galatians chapter 3. All right, Galatians chapter 7, Acts chapter 7. And again, I'm not going to get too busy with the numbers. So I'm really going to take my time with this. I've taught this before, and this is kind of like really my theme, because I talk about it all the time. But it's always in pieces. So I'm going to try to just bring forth these numbers, and although you've heard me say it time and time again, I have a very particular reason I'm going over it now. And I'll reveal that, well, let me just share that I think that we're so close. I need to remind us where we are in time. So, if you ever want to go to any of my teachings on this particular subject, you can go into YouTube and go on the what time is it? And so I'll stick with that as what time is it? So there's what time is it now? What time is it? Just different ones where I've taught this message. But we're so close, I want to continue to look at the time. You know, when you have to go someplace, what do? If you have on a watch, you always keep up with the time. You know, what time is it? So we have someplace to go. We have to meet with the King. We have an appointed time with the King. So I'm always checking what time it is. My daughter Lori, I love my children, period. But I just want to say, my daughter Lori, I went by a job yesterday and dropped something by her. And as I normally do, I seem to just automatically go into this conversation all the time with my daughter. I say, well, this is probably about the 1,000th time. But the thing that is so beautiful about my daughter, she just always just listens to me. Every time like it's the first time. And I'm like, you know, and I just love that about my children. They're grown, but the respect and the love that I get from them is priceless. You can't buy that. You know, you can't. There's no price that you can put on that. And I walked out just smiling and just thinking, you know, I love my children. I really do. And I was just thanking Yahweh as I was walking out the door. I'm like, Yahweh, I feel so wealthy to have such a family that, well, I have 3 daughters now. My house has increased. And I have 3 sons now. Daughter-in-law and grandchildren included. So my house has grown a little bit. Abraham, if you can count the stars of the sky, so is your seed. And I call him Father Abraham. So for me to see my house grow, I see Abraham's house grow as well. And so I give thanks. And again, I was just, just speaking to my daughter, no matter how many times she hear me go through it, she would just listen like she's hearing it for the first time. And I would just say, well, for a few hundred times now, but every time, we're on the road traveling, she's in the back seat, and that's what keeps me awake. I go into talking about prophecy and where we are in time, and I'm driving and I'm getting tired, and I know she's back there. I start talking about it, and that'll get me home. But here we go. All right, so Acts chapter 7, verse, I don't know why I'm squinting. I have some help up here. Okay, there it goes. Chapter 7, verse 6. Okay. And Elohim spoke in this way, that his seed would be sojourners in a foreign land, and they would be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. And the nation to whom they shall be enslaved, I shall judge, said Yahweh, Elohim. And after this, they shall come out and serve me in this place. And that is a direct quote from Bereshit chapter 15. And so notice that we are in Acts. Question: would Acts be New Testament or Old Testament? New Testament. So that means this is after the crucifixion of Yeshua. And so far what I've talked about is from Abraham forward. From Abraham to 500-year period brings us the Exodus, chapter 12, brings us the Exodus of Israel, the birth of Israel. So I call that the birth of Abraham, from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Israel, for 500 years. Now, this 400 years can seem to get lost in that if we don't think about it, because you look at 500 and 400, it easily fits in there. But that's the birth of Israel. They're coming out of Israel. So now we got to figure out, how long were they in the land of Israel? So let's go to Galatians chapter 3. And take a look all right, so Galatians chapter 3, and let's start at verse 13. Messiah redeemed us from the curse of the Torah, having become a curse for us, for it has been written, cursed is everyone who hangs upon a tree, in order that the blessings of Abraham might come upon the nations in Messiah Yeshua, to receive the promise of the Spirit through belief. Continuing, verse 15. Brothers, as a man I say it, a covenant, even though it is a man's, yet if it is confirmed, no one set it aside or adds to it. But the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. Did y'all catch that part right there? To Abraham and. I paused on the word and, because I want you to know he spoke to Abraham's seed as well. So he didn't just speak to Abraham. He spoke to Abraham's seed. And I received that through the Holy Spirit right now. I want you to understand that as I'm reading it, Yahweh is also giving us understanding. But the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. He does not say, and the two seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, who is Messiah. So, speaking to Abraham, he also speaks to Mashiach, who wasn't even born yet. And I think it's okay if we include ourselves. Even though it says singular, because it's making sure that we understand it is speaking of the Messiah. But as the Messiah is, we are the seed of Abraham. Verse 17. Now, this I say, Torah that came 430 years later does not nullify or annul a covenant previously confirmed by Elohim in Messiah, as so to do away with the promise. For the inheritance is by Torah. For if the inheritance is by Torah, it is no longer by promise. But Elohim gave it to Abraham through a promise. Why then the Torah? It was added because of transgressions, until the seed should come to whom the promise was made. I want to make sure that I keep those plurals and singulars straight. And it was ordained through messengers in the hand of a mediator. The mediator, however, is not of one, but Elohim is one. Is the Torah then against the promises of Elohim? Let it not be. For if the Torah had been given, that was able to make alive, truly righteousness would have been by Torah. But the scriptures has shut up all mankind under sin, that the promise by belief in Yeshua, Messiah, must be given to those who believe. But before belief came, we were being guarded under Torah, having been shut up for the belief being about to be revealed. Therefore, the Torah became our trainer unto Mashiach, Messiah, in order to be declared right by belief. And after belief has come, we are no longer under a trainer. For you are all sons of Elohim through belief in Messiah Yeshua. For as many of you as were immersed in Messiah have put on Messiah, there is not Yehudi nor Greek, Judah nor Greek. There is not slave nor free. There is not male and female. For you are all one in Messiah Yeshua. And if you are of Messiah, then you are seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. There's the definition. We are heirs according to the promise. So now that means we got to figure out what is the promise. Well, the promise is what I've already read to you. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, going right to it. So verse 13 being the promise, So let's further analyze it. It says, a promise that came 430 years later does not nullify a promise previously given, confirmed in Yahweh, right? So, here's how a covenant is confirmed. There must be death. Because a promise can be broken. And so here comes the problem that we have. And that problem is that Yahweh is the one who gave the promise. But he cannot die. So here is a prophecy right here in the book of Genesis once again. We may not look at Genesis as prophecy, but when you begin to really look at it, it's nothing but prophecy. Because it speaks of things both past and future. So much so that even the land that we read about already, it says in that promise that Abraham's seed would get the land. Now this one is seeds as plural. I want to keep those plurals and singulars straight so that it is understood. But the land that will be given from Mizraim to Euphrates, and notice that Saudi Arabia is in the middle of that. So if you think about it, look at, in your mind's eye, look at the tip of Egypt or Africa. Go from where Egypt is in the northeast part and take that all the way over to Iran, Iraq. Everything in between those rivers, the river Nile of Africa and Euphrates River, you have all of that in the middle point there. Why would one man need all of that land? So this is why I said we have to keep those alignments straight. One of the things when I'm teaching in school and I'm teaching math to my students, this is something we will have to do so that they understand alignment. Because as a student, you know, you put your numbers kind of anywhere. But to remember how to align them. This is your ones column, and this is your tens column, right? So that's very simple. So the same thing for us in understanding prophecy. Understanding prophecy, you got to know who he's talking to, who he's talking about, when is he talking, when is he talking about. So to keep those straight help you understand it a little better, because if you confuse the lines, it doesn't make very good sense. Even though we can come away with some good information, but to really, you know, like fine tune, like on a radio, you got to get it just right, right? Those old radios are like same thing with prophecy. All right, so. Seed as in one, as a Messiah. I know Messiah don't need all of that land, but if there's a kingdom that Messiah will come back and be the reigning king over, which includes the land, the promised land, or Canaan land, that means it has to be more than one seed. All right, now, I think we're there on that part. I just wanted to kind of draw that out. And I am overemphasizing certain points. Again, because I'm really cueing in on these numbers. And here is two numbers that have been skewed. They've been blurred. Because when we read Genesis chapter 15, in traditional settings, Church people do it all the time. They read the two numbers as though they are one. If they still will read that, 400 years, but by the time you get into the New Testament, it's 430 years. You don't think about they're different. It's one and the same. So when I began to look at this, I believe this is where Yahweh began to really open up my understanding by keeping those columns straight and applying what goes where. Now, let's go to Jeremiah. Let's look at Jeremiah. Chapter 29. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. But thus saith Yahweh, when 70 years are completed at Babylon, or Babel, I shall visit you and establish my good word toward you, to bring you back to this place. We keep hearing that. There's a theme here. Bring you back to this place, right? And so we can surmise that Jeremiah must have been in the land of Jerusalem when Yahweh spoke this to him, because he said in 70 years. Had he been taken, or the folks have been taken yet, he may have counted for how many years they've been there, or still given a total. But either way, we know that they were taken from the promised land. So that's factual. So let's just kind of place them there at 70 years. They will return back there. So let's use back here as Jerusalem. Okay? All right, so we know that that's the place they want to be. It's the promised land, right? So we know that everyone wants to be in the promised land. All right, so he's given us another number. So, 70 years, Yahweh says, and I'll read it again. For thus saith Yahweh, when 70 years are completed at Babylon, I shall visit you and establish my good word towards you, to bring you back to this place. Verse 11, for I know the plans I am planning for you, declares Yahweh, plans of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and an expectancy. Then you shall call on me, and shall come and pray to me, and I shall listen to you. And you shall seek me, and shall find me, when you search for me with all your heart. And I shall be found by you, declares Yahweh, and I shall turn back your captivity. Very important part here. And shall gather you from all the nations, from all the places where I have driven you, declares Yahweh, and I shall bring you back to the place from which I have exiled you. So let's look at something. In 1947, let's go with 48. In 1948, the UN had granted statehood to the land of Israel. Once again, the land was called Israel. So there's a lot of prophecies that have happened over the past couple of thousand years. But let's kind of go from one end and look at the other end. And so that's what we're doing here, 1948. And so, how does this apply at any point? First, let's ask this question. Is what the UN has done and sanctioned correct? And so some of you would remember at Sukkot, this was one of the questions. Do we go by a political move or the move of Yah? And so this was definitely a political move, but let's look at it even further. Because the UN, who did not exist 3 years prior. So in 1945, the UN was called the League of Nations. And it was a pledge between differing nations, European nations, that we will no longer fight war without some type of diplomatic intervention. And so they formed the League of Nations. That's right after World War II. So we had World War I, 1913, 14, 15 in there. And then World War II, which was 1938, kind of getting on the way, ending 1945, when they came together with this plan. And they've been meeting ever since. Matter of fact, right here in this country, the United States, is where the UN finally had its resting place, far as an official conference buildings or places. And September 11th, which is a date that is now etched into the history of the United States, was knocked down. The UN was called the Twin Towers. So we have a major event that is recorded for history and recognized throughout the world and through the nations. All right, so this 1948 was sanctioned by the UN as the nation of Israel, and a few years later, in 1967, years ago, they fought another war, 6-day war, for land and peace. They took a certain amount of the land, and actually they ended up giving back for peace. And so that's been the ongoing conversation ever since. They've been trying to convince Israel to give up more land. Now, can this be any way connected to the timeline of Yahweh? And so what I want to do is I want to go back to the 400 year and the 430 year. First, let me establish the 430 year, which we've already read in the book of Acts, which says, Acts chapter 7, which says, a promise that was previously given 430 years does not annul a promise that was previously confirmed by Yah, right? So we've already established that something is 430 years. But there was a promise of 400 years. And so keep the columns straight. So the promise was given to Abraham. 400 years, your descendants would be enslaved and mistreated. Acts says a promise that was, a covenant that was given 430 years later does not nullify a promise previously given. So, which one is the promise? The 400 years or the 430 years? I just want to submit to you Genesis chapter 15, verse 13 proves that the promise is 400 years. So I want to do this. I want to replace 400 years with a simple word. The promise, the covenant that came down through 430 years. What came down through 430 years? Let's go ahead and label that. Mount Sinai. So, coming out of Egypt, they met at Mount Sinai, and Yahweh gave them the covenant of promise, or the commandments of which we read every Shabbat. We are reminded of this 430-year period. That is from the time they went in, passed over, to the time they came out. Passed over. Can we call that a coincidence? It is not a coincidence that they went in there, and this is proven in Exodus chapter 13. Chapter 13. If not 13, it's up to about 15 is your furthest you can go, but it says, the same day you went in is the same day you came out. So, Passover, 430 years prior, they went in. 430 years later, they came out. Abraham was born 500 years prior to them coming out of Egypt. Don't get confused with what I just did. They came out of Egypt. It was a 500 year from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Israel. That's all I'm saying. All right. So now, the promise that came, or the covenant that came 430 years, does not nullify the promise. See what I just did? The promise of 400 years. That I would give to your seed land inheritance. They will take the land inheritance. Now, in the fourth generation, they will come back here, for the offense of the Amorites had not happened yet. So can you kind of imagine there was a 500-year period of time from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Israel coming out? Yahweh was waiting for them to amass enough people to go against Israel, to attack them. Because look, he delayed them. In Genesis, he said, for the offense of the Amorites has not yet been completed. Which means when they come out of Egypt, they will be attacked. Well, why didn't Yahweh bring them on out even sooner? Because he already knew they were going to attack them. And because they attacked them, they became also enemies of Yahweh. And so now is when we see Esau, who marries into Ishmael, those of the Amorites or the Moabites. So different ones who became enemies of Israel, which is because they, I'll bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. All right, so that's kind of what we are seeing that is set up. All right, so, and I'm coming to a conclusion here. Go to Jeremiah 30, one more page, chapter 30. Let's look at this promise. Verse 1. The words that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, Thus spoken Yahweh, Elohim of Yisrael, saying, Write in a book for yourself all the words that I have spoken to you. For look, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall turn back the captivity of my people Yisrael and Yehudah, declares Yahweh, and I shall bring them back to the land that I gave to their fathers and let them possess it. So here's the promise once again. The promise was of inheritance of the land. Why? Because Abraham believed and he was obedient. So Yahweh, he has written this deep into our DNA. Verse 4, and these are the words Yahweh spoke concerning Israel and Yehudah. So this is not just Israel. This is not, Yehudah. Because what has happened, let me just pause right here. What happened in 1948 is they went into Russia and began to fly some folks back. And before 1948, if you go back a few hundred years, like 1700s, 1600s, this land where they got some of these people was called the let me go back to 48. What it's called now, or at that time, it was called the Jewish Pale. But before it was called the Jewish Pale, I'm drawing a blank, but some of you know those who have come, Kazites, yes. Those who are Kazites, it was the land of the Kazites. And so they began to treat them bad later on in the years, in the 1700s, 1800s. And so by 1900, they had begun to extract some of them out of that place because the king of Khazaria, he converted his land into those who called themselves Jewish. And so they began to learn the language and so on and so on. So then as they moved into New York, from New York into the land of Israel, petitioned for the land itself. And when the the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire, as they were called, when their term ended, and they said we will no longer renew our term, it wasn't 400 years, it was 300 and something years. They said we will no longer renew our contract. So Great Britain took it over for another 20 years. Their contract ran out, and then 1948, I think it's May 14th, if I remember my dates correctly. May 14th, 1948, they were declared a nation. And of course, you know how that went even to this day. Now, is this a coincidence that in 1948 that they become a nation? Well, let's look at Father Abraham once again. What year was Father Abraham born? 1948. We already have it on the board. So with Abraham being born 1948 from Adam, from creation, okay? So 1948 years, Abraham was born. We're going from Adam, all right? We're good on that. Now, so 1948 AD, did Yahweh know that they were going to change times and all of that like 2,000 years ago? Oh yeah, he did. He already wrote about it. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, he says, it desires to change appointed times and laws. So, let's look at the big change. They went to 0, they went to 1, and now we're at 2017. So why is that? Well, let's go back a little bit and look at something else. In 16 1619, the first ship landed in Jamestown, Virginia, about less than 4 hours drive from North Carolina from where we are today. And so 1619, I would like to do this. I think we can just kind of really bring this in quickly. So we're going to add 400 years to 1619. And if you already have your total, somebody go ahead and shout it out so I know what to write. 2019. So is this a coincidence that there is a time period that still awaits for a promise to be fulfilled, with the assumption of this has not yet been completed? Now we know that this one has. They came out of Egypt. So there's a people who is somehow related to the landmass of what they call today Africa, just as they did back then. So there's a 400 year that still lingers, because we know that this one has been manifested. We know that this has been manifested. But here is something that we are still looking for. So just looking at the year that the African slaves came out of Africa, landed here as indentured servants, 1619, and just for hypothetical, adding that to it, there's a 2019 expectation of fulfillment of 400. So, okay, could that be coincidental? All right, let's continue to look at something else. So now, if there's every 50 years, there's 10 jubilees inside of 500 years. But let's look at this right here. There's a 70-year period that we have to look at, because Yahweh said, speaking to Jeremiah, that he was going to bring them out of Babylon. Well, is it coincidental that the book of Revelation speaks also about Babylon? Well, Babylon fell many years ago, never rose again. That is correct. That's factual. But still, the prophecy, which is in Revelation, speaks of Babylon's falling. It talks about it in chapter 14, 16, 17, and 19. So I think at least 3 to 4 books that I can remember that it speaks about Babylon's falling, Babel's falling, Babel's falling, right? So that's something that we're familiar with. So, if manifested Babylon was a 70-year period, should we look at mystery Babylon and check it for a 70-year period? So, let's look at that. From 1948 to present day, 2017, is exactly 69 years. And someone who has a calculator, you can go ahead and check my numbers and make sure that I am correct. I know I'm correct, but I want you to check it just to be sure. And so, if that is the case, while someone is verifying that, so go from 2017, plug in 1948 and subtract. And so whoever get that first, just go ahead and shout it out. 69 years. So here's the big question. Now, if we add one more year, I want you to put on your thinking caps. How many years would that be? Shout it out.
70 years.
70 years, right? So at this point, 2017 is 69 years. If we add one more year, which will take us to 2018, that will be 400 years. And so there is something very significant about this 70-year period that we need to understand. How does that work? Well, it's the promise of Abraham that he would turn back captivity. What other nation do we know, or what other people? There's plenty of people who were enslaved and taken captive. Even today, there's still, it's called human trafficking now. People being enslaved and taken. But this one says, your people would be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. And so, someone help me with this. I need your calculator once again. 1619. Put this one in first. 1865. Let's go with emancipation. $1865. Got that? Subtract 1619. And we know that represents Jamestown. Let me know what you got when you get it.
246.
So 246 years would have passed. So 2 plus 4 equals 6. Plus 6 equals 12. Is that correct? 2 plus 4, 6, plus 6 equals 12. So is there something hidden in the appointed times that Yahweh said we would find? There will be hidden manna. Now, I'm not trying to say everybody's going to come up with this, just right away. But this is what hidden manna looks like. So I subtracted the year they say we landed here. This is documented. Documented. So this would be like, for a long time, provable, right? They also said that slavery ended for us in 1865. And what's significant about this date, it was also Passover. April 9th, the eve of Passover, when General Lee submitted defeat. Now, the official papers are going to read different dates. But I'm talking about when this man rode in on his horse to Proximo, Virginia. How do you say it? Appomattox, Virginia, and gave a letter of defeat and said, we will end the war. You have, the Union have won. And a man by the name of Abraham as president. Were these coincidences? I just don't think they're coincidences. Yahweh says, I have an appointed time. And so, I'm submitting that maybe that time the 12 tribes are being manifested, and Minister Byers read that today, Romans 8. The whole earth eagerly waits for the children of Yahweh to be manifested. And so, has it been happening all the time? I think so. So, as I kind of conclude, well, what about this 2019 date? And then the 2018, 400 years. Well, excuse me. 2018 will be the 70th year. 2019 will be the 400th year. And let's look at the calendars of the Hebrews. They're not the calendars of the nations. And so as we begin to analyze, our year continues. As they're beginning in January, a new year, we're not beginning a new year. We're going over into a new year, traditional calendar, but ours is still rolling. But anyway, so next year will be a 70th year period. And so what will be significant about this? Well, now comes when, as I spoke about it in the past, I'm not going to go to it now, but just simply remind you of there's something that has to happen. The 1260th day is going to be met at this 70th year period. That is very significant, very significant. But now, can we pack up our bags and say we're going home? No, that's not it. Because we still got to make it to the 400th year. That's the 70th year. And the 70th year, what it resolves is there's 2 witnesses. Now remember, I've said before, I believe that they're already here. And I believe that their 1260th day will come up during the feast season of next year. And so when that happens, what has to happen? The 2 of them, the 2 witnesses, they will lose their lives to Hasatan. Hasatan will defeat them, and he gets another 30 days. This is from my research, just looking at, here's something that I got hung up on, and it took me some years to really put everything in columns to understand it. The bride gets 1260 days. The 2 witnesses who come to judge the nations get 1260 days, and the 2 witnesses get 1260 days, and the bride gets, Hasatan gets 1260 days. Now, that's 3 different groups. Hasatan, the 2 witnesses, and the children of Israel. But remember, the promise is, I shall return your captivity, or turn back your captivity, bring you back to this land, right? So that promise is still out there. There's still a 400 year that have not been resolved. So whether he's speaking about us or not, if we prepare ourselves as though it is us, when the time comes and we don't get to go, but we're ready, what would we lose? Nothing. But what if it is really us and we don't prepare ourselves? When the time comes, what will we be? The foolish bride. 5 foolish and 5 wise. But he's talking about bringing back all 12. But you only need 12. I love saying this. You only need 12 to get all 12. You need 1 from every troop. But the scripture already bears out that it's going to be at least 144,000. That's the smallest number that is represented of Israel. So you know that your 12 tribes are covered. 12 times 12, 144. Wait a minute, 144,000. We were sold on ships. The contract was for 144,000 slaves per contract to every country that would purchase, because these Africans, they're good builders, you know, and they live long, they're strong. So, Revelation, it talks about 144,000. We were sold by the church, the Pope, per contract at 144,000 per contract, called the Asiento Papers. You can look that up. 1713 is a good year to see that was in print, where they sold us into different places, different Caribbean islands. Why do you think 1492 is very significant as well? 1492, because they went into the Caribbeans and sold slaves there. So when you go to the Caribbeans or South America, why do you think so many of those people look like us? Because they are us. So I don't think it's a coincidence that we need to prepare ourselves, whether us or some other group, for this time that is very significant. And we have no time to waste, because the 70th year comes in. There will be a resolution in the 70th year, which is what I was talking about. 1260th day will come into fullness. But then Hasatan, he gets 1290, which means that's 30 days additional to the two witnesses. So he defeats the two witnesses. They lie in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days, which is the next big sign that I'm going to be looking for next year. I don't know whether we're going to see it or not, but the scripture says those who are in the land and near will witness that their bodies will lie in the streets for 3.5 days, because that's what I'm talking about now. 1260 days, that's 3.5 years. Daniel, times, and half times. So, and I'm just kind of throwing it all in because I'm bringing it in. So, Hasatan gets 1290, so we know he defeats them, so he gets a longer period of time. And then Hasatan is also defeated on his day, not 1291, 1292, but 1290th day. So this is why we're seeing the increase in evil taking place into the nations at this time. And even at this time, we have a lot of our people who look like me, being beat, brutalized, tortured by paid assassins in blue suits, uniforms, policemen. Reverend, you sure against the police? No, I'm not. They're all through my family and have been through my family. And I, who was on the police force and also raped by a policeman. So much has gone and is still going on with African, so-called African American. And now it's starting to bleed over to European descendants where I said before, hey, you're next. And so now it's happening more and more, according to social media, it's now happening. All right, so I think we got some of the major numbers that I did want to reveal. There's one more. I also looked at how many years, let's do this, and I'm going to close here. Okay, how many years, I need your calculators again, 2017, and subtract emancipation, 1865. And that would tell us how many years it's been since that time. 152 years. So when I first looked at this, y'all know I already searched it out. When I first looked at this, what is significant about 152? And I kept thinking about it, and then I said, let me add one. And as soon as I did that, guess what number I came up to? 153. So what is significant about 153? Remember Yeshua was talking to, after he was crucified, and he rose and he was on the side frying up some fish. Y'all know he's a chef too, right? He was frying some fish. And he said, children, do you have any food? Do you have any fish? And so they said no. And so, the night before, they had to clean their nets, right? And after they cleaned their nets, he said, now go back out, throw your net on the what? Right side. And so because they were obedient to his instructions, when they knew it, they had, the scripture says, 153 big fish. Yeshua said, this generation, this adulterous generation, desires a sign, and none shall be given to it except the sign of Jonah. What is the sign of Jonah? Big fish. Just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish, y'all know, don't listen to Hollywood. Wells, don't listen to them. Just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Adam be in the belly of the fish, of the waters, 3 days and 3 nights. So, this 153 big fish that they pulled out says, and they shall be known as the sign of the fish. So they shall be known as the 153 fish. So the 153 is the sign of the fish. And the church has always put the sign of the fish along with the menorah, right? Trying to represent the church. Not fully understanding how Yahweh, how Yeshua has tied us in to the sign of the fish. So the sign of the fish, and I'm putting, y'all know I'm putting everything together, right? So you got Jonah is one story, the 153 is another story, but I'm fusing it all together. Y'all know I just do my little goulash there. But it's the sign of the fish. 153, since I'm working on numbers today. So, where did we get that 153 from? That 153 would actually be the resolve of 70 years. It would take us back, it would take us into another year, which will be 2018. 2018. If we add that one more year, we're now at the sign of the fish. So I say to you, yes, we should prepare ourselves. Are we the ones? Who knows? When Yahweh gets here, when Yeshua gets here, he will let us know. But for now, let's just prepare ourselves. And so if we are ready and he takes us back, we're the wise. And if we're not ready, and the door is shut when he comes, then we're the foolish. But the 12th tribe will be regathered and taken into Jerusalem. Will this happen next year? I don't think so. There's one more prophecy I'm going to give you, and I'll close out. The book of Daniel. Somebody go ahead and open up to the 12th chapter of the book of Daniel, and I believe it's verse 17, or it's coming up to verse 17. It might be 15. But whatever the last verse is, it says how long you should stay. So we already talked about 1260. We talked about Hasatan 1290. Let's find out how long the bride is supposed to stay. When you have it, go ahead and read it. It should say something about the time element.
How about starting at 11?
Okay.
12, 11, and from the time that which is continual is taken away. And from the time that which is continual is taken away, and the abomination that lays waste is set up, is 1,290 days. Blessed is he who is waiting earnestly and comes to the 1,335 days. But you go your way till the end, and rest, and arise to your lot at the end of days.
Hallelujah. So that 1260, 12.
Wait on you. Everybody's moving.